What's up guys, Troy here, and welcome to another episode of Battlefield 3 My Thoughts. Today we're going to be talking about the whole M16A3 AEK-971 debate. This is certainly one of the most debated topics in Battlefield 3, and even though it's been debated extensively, I still feel there are a few points I can make that haven't really been touched upon in the debate in the past. So I'm going to cover a few of those points in this video. Now, for full disclosure purposes, the screenshot you're looking at is a screenshot of my legacy account on my Battlelog page. It shows that I do have 131 service stars with the M16A3, 100 service stars with the AEK-971, and my number 3 gun being the AN-94, I only have 32 service stars with it, and it's quite a difference. Now, for the large majority of the M16A3 issue, balance has been one of the main topics discussed, and that's great because that goes to the heart of most competitive games, first-person shooters, real-time strategies, fighting games, and balance is a big issue. Now that's fine and all, but I feel that there are other arguments that haven't been touched upon, and I really want to touch upon those. Please forgive me if I start to ramble a bit. I'm going to try to keep my thoughts well organized, but I'm not only speaking from my brain, I'm kind of speaking from my heart and how I feel about gaming in general, and competitive gaming, and competitive first-person shooters in general. A note on the gameplay footage you're watching is actually kind of an old gameplay footage. It's about a month and a half, almost 2 months old, I believe. I cut out the start of this round. I started with the AEK-971. I remember I was getting really frustrated. Even though my comms aren't recorded, I'm actually quite mad. When I'm communicating with my squad, nothing they did wrong. It's just I felt I wasn't doing as well as I could have, and I could have done better. I do rack up a lot of kills. We do get the win. I'm sorry to spoil the round for you. We do get the win, but I also rack up a lot of deaths, and I was getting really frustrated. So I thought this round could showcase some of the points I'm talking about in the whole M16A3 AEK-971 debate. And I say AEK-971, I'm really going to talk more about the M16A3. I feel that weapon has received a lot more flack than the AEK has in terms of the whole Battlefield 3 debate. So I want to talk about that weapon more than the AEK-971. Now, I wanted to start off my first argument was personal preference. And this goes to the heart of my other arguments. In my personal preference, I prefer guns with a high rate of fire. Other than the Mark 14 Mod 0 in Battlefield Bad Company 2, I really liked the AUG. It had a very high rate of fire. I liked the weapon a lot. I don't really care for it in Battlefield 3. Other guns, I tell people a lot that a lot of the guns I prefer in Battlefield 3 I did not like in Bad Company 2, and vice versa. In Bad Company 2, I liked the AUG. I liked the Mark 14. In Battlefield in Battlefield 3, I liked the M16. I liked the AEK-971. In Battlefield Bad Company 2, I could not stand the M16A2. I could not stand the AEK-971. It was just something felt off about it. But that goes to the heart of it. Every player has their personal preference, what class, what weapon. They also have their own personal goals and personal mentality when they play this game. Everybody knows I'm a competitor at heart. I like to compete. I've said in previous videos before about this. My mentality, regardless of any type of game I'm playing, I want to win. I could be playing Super Mario Brothers on the NES, Command & Conquer Generals, Battlefield 3, Metal Gear Solid back on the old PlayStation 1. My goal is the same across all those platforms, across all those genres of games. My goal is the same, to win. Winning is where I get my fun from. People say, games are about fun. Yes, they're an entertainment medium, but I get a lot of fun out of winning. That's always been fun for me. And that goes to the core group of personal goals, personal preferences, and the personal mentalities of each individual player. And a lot of those different personal preferences and goals and mentalities are going to clash in a public game. Whereas in a competitive game, you're going to have a lot of like-minded people. You're going to have teammates and opponents. They want the same thing. They want that win. Because they get that rush, they get that high, they get that fun from winning. It feels good. It's great. It's awesome. You have achieved something. You know, and that goes kind of the heart, it goes to the heart of the next argument I have, and that's really the ownership of the game. Everybody's paid their own money to play this game. I personally right now have spent $192 on Battlefield. I bought it on both PlayStation 3 and the PC, and both premium on both PlayStation 3 and PC. Ended up shelling out money for the co-op weapons shortcut kit because I don't feel the co-op really has a place in this game. I bought the Spec Act kit to get a couple extra camos, a couple extra dog tags. Nothing too big on the PlayStation side. And I'm probably going to have to spend another $30 or $40 on the PlayStation side because my disc, either my Battlefield 3 disc or my PlayStation disc drive is going out. I'm not sure which, but I might have to go and buy Battlefield 3 for a third time, get the digital download. So I've spent money, my own personal money, on this game, and nobody can tell me how to play otherwise. It's as simple as that. Unless you maybe are playing in a league for competitive gaming, or playing a part of a competitive team, then maybe you can, you might have to subject yourself to being told certain ways to play. For lethal gaming, I call the plays on the field. But even then, I don't tell my teammates what gun they can and can't use, unless a league or another team decides on what weapons we don't really want to use. Other than that, I tell people strategies and tactics and positioning. I don't tell my players they can't use this class, they can't use this weapon. That is their personal preference. They've paid their amount of money into the game that I've paid. So they own the game just as much as I own the game. It's as simple as that. And I believe that ownership of the game, nobody really has a right to tell you how to play. I may not like seeing guys sitting back on a mortar or 20 miles away from the objective with a sniper rifle. It's frustrating. Especially when my mentality, again, back to the personal preference and mentality and goals, my mentality is to win. They may be hampering our ability to win. But honestly, in a pub game, I honestly can't tell them how to play the game. They bought the game, they can play it how they want. It just means I have to step up, I have to up the bar, I have to up the ante and do extra work. And I'll be glad to do that because I want the win more than anything else. It's as simple as that. I don't want it. You know, you have all of the extra BS that goes with the game. Camos, equipment unlocks, dog tags. That's cool and all. It gives more depth, more replayability to the game. And I'm certainly not adverse to that. But my ultimate goal is to win. And no matter what game. Regardless of what class, what weapon I use. And that goes to the ownership of the game. If you've paid the money to play the game, nobody can tell you how to play. You know, when lethal is scrimming, I call the plays. I have strategies for certain maps and certain game modes, but I don't tell people what class to play. I certainly don't tell people what camo to equip their player or their gun as, or what gun to use. I certainly don't. They've earned the right to play the way they want, and I think that's a big argument. Another argument goes to some of the mentalities of certain players. It seems like there's a personal offense some players have to getting killed by certain weapons. And I want to say this, I've been thinking this for a long time. If you're the type of person who gets offended because you're killed by a certain type of weapon, or the same weapon over and over, as opposed to getting offended to being killed at all, you're doing it wrong. You should be happy that you don't die at all, and that you live, and that you survive and get more kills than deaths. It's as simple as that. There's no way around that argument. I mean, you cannot get mad because a certain guy killed you using a certain tactic, a certain weapon, a certain piece of equipment. There's always the factor of that person got the drop on you, that person had superior positioning, you made a mistake. We're all human, we all do it. It's why they put erasers on pencils. It's as simple as that. So you can't personally be offended. And that goes to some sort of, this seems to be an unwritten honor code, if you will, kind of a sense of honor. And I never really understood that if your mentality is the same as mine, and all you have in mind is to achieve the win, that means you will do everything outside of cheating to achieve that win. That means you'll pick the top shelf equipment, you'll pick the best tactics, you'll play with the best teammates, you'll use the best class. It's as simple as that. You cannot get mad at another person because they do that. Now let's devise a hypothetical scenario. I've kind of delved in deeper about this. Let's say me and you were in a 1v1 fight in real life, and it's kind of a duel, an old school duel, and I bring two weapons and I put them on the ground. One's a pistol and one's a slingshot. Are you really going to tell me that with a win on the line, you're going to pick up the slingshot because the pistol seems too easy or too newbie, if I might add? If you are, well, you're doing it wrong, and you don't have your priorities right. Your priorities should be to win. And if your priorities are to win, you will pick the top shelf equipment, you will pick the best kits, the best weapons, loadouts, whatever. It's as simple as that. And that goes to the heart of competitive gaming. And a lot of people say, well, if you're a good player, you'll be able to use any weapon and come out on top. Not necessarily. Not with the built-in game mechanics the way they are. The stats don't lie. They dictate how a weapon operates. It doesn't matter how good the player is. Sometimes the limitations of that weapon are just too much of a limitation. I'll give you an analogy. I'm a huge fan of sports. Most all sports. I'm not a big fan of baseball. I think it's a very flawed sport. But I'll do talk baseball, and I do keep up with it. People tend to ask me, well, who's your favorite player, or who's the best player in this sport, or that sport, or this sport? And people ask me, who do you think the best player of baseball is of all time? And I'll say, well, not necessarily all time, but at least the last 25 to 30 years, I'll say Barry Bonds. I say, well, he's mired in controversy because of steroids. And I'll say, well, guess what? The entire Major League Baseball league was actually using steroids, and he still came out on top and grabbed every record that you could possibly grab, with the exception of World Series wins. He's shown that even though everybody else is using steroids and he's using steroids, he still rose to the pack. So I'm not trying to equate the M16A3 to cheating. It certainly isn't. It's offered in the game. It's a very viable weapon to use. But if you go into a competitive match and you see two teams of 5 going a 5v5 infantry-only conquest, and all 10 players are using the M16A3, the team that rises to the top and defeats the other team, they're all using the same class, they're all using the same equipment. The team that wins shows that they're a lot better. It's an even playing field, they're all using the same class and same equipment, and one team still rose to the top, and one player or two players probably are up there with a large majority of kills, high KD, high score per minute, and yet people think that you have to use a variety of weapons to be a good player, and that if you're a good player, you'll use any weapon. And I just say it's just not really a viable argument when you're going against really stout players in a competitive format where you cannot necessarily control the engagement as much as, say, a pub game. You can't go into a scrim with the UMP-45 or the PP-19 or the AKS-74U. You're just not going to win. The game mechanics, the mechanics of the game limit you to that no matter how good a player you are. The stats of a certain weapon limit you to what you can and cannot achieve. And speaking of stats, that goes to one of my a couple other arguments I want to make about the M16A3. One of the big arguments I have is, why now? Why are we complaining about the M16A3 now? I know it's been complained about a large majority of the life cycle of Battlefield 3 itself, but why now in the Battlefield community? Battlefield 3, without a doubt, is the most popular Battlefield game in all of the Battlefield franchise, and the game that immediately preceded it was Battlefield Bad Company 2. A large majority of Battlefield 3 players have played Battlefield Bad Company 2. Now, when it comes to a Battlefield 3 or even a Battlefield 4 wish list, the one weapon I see a lot of people really request for Battlefield 3 or even Battlefield 4, I know it's kind of late in the game, but people still want this gun, and that's the XM8. Now, I don't really want to sound, too much like a stat nerd, but we're gonna talk about some of the stats of both the XM8 and the from Bad Company 2 and the M16A3 from Battlefield 3. Everybody knows the M16A3 has 800 rounds per minute rate of fire, 25 max damage, 18.4 drop-off damage, minimum damage, short reload of 1.8. The XM8 does 16.7 max damage, 14.3 minimum damage. Its rate of fire was 750, and its reload speed was 2.1 seconds. Now, it only had a long reload because of the limitations of the Frostbite 1.5 engine in comparison to the Frostbite 2.0 used in Battlefield 3. So there weren't any short reloads in Bad Company 2 like there are in Battlefield 3. But still, if you go and look at the other assault rifles, the F2000, the AUG, the AN-94, the 416, the M16A2, and the AEK-971 in Battlefield Bad Company 2, you'll see the XM8 is basically the M16A3 of Bad Company 2. It's that all-around weapon. There are guns that have a lower rate of fire. There are guns that have a higher rate of fire. There are guns that have a faster reload speed. There's guns that have a slower reload speed. There's guns that do more damage. There's guns that do less damage. It's as simple as that. It's a very middle-of-the-pack weapon. Jack of all trades, master of none. So my big argument is, why now? Why are we now complaining about the M16A3 when, if you use the same arguments that are used against the M16A3 in Battlefield 3, if you apply those to Bad Company 2, it means people should have been complaining about the XM8. Yet I hear nobody complaining about the XM8. They have nothing but love for that weapon. I liked it a decent amount. I preferred the AUG over the XM8 and the Mark 14 over the XM8, but it was still a good weapon. And that's the thing. There are, in my personal opinion, the M16A3 is not overpowered. There are weapons that have a faster reload speed. There are weapons that have a shorter reload, or have a longer reload speed. There are weapons that do more damage. There are weapons that have a higher rate of fire. There are weapons that have a lower rate of fire. There are weapons that have less recoil, and there are weapons that have more recoil. It's very middle of the road in terms of where the M16A3 is for Battlefield 3. In order for it to be OP, it doesn't have to be overused. People say, well, it's overused because it's OP. No, it's not. It's used quite a bit because it's a good weapon. It's not the best. In order for the M16A3 in Battlefield 3 to be overpowered, it would basically have to do more damage than any of the assault rifles. It would have to have a higher rate of fire than any of the other assault rifles, lower recoil, lower spread, faster reload times. It doesn't have any of that. There are assault rifles that perform better or worse in every single category that the assault rifles are ranked in. It's very middle of the pack. And the XM8 was almost nearly the identical gun in Bad Company 2. So I really don't understand why now do we complain, but we didn't complain in Bad Company 2. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And the problem is nerfing guns in the first place that do not need to be nerfed. When there are other guns that don't perform as well as the M16A3, certainly underperform even weapons that are better than the M16A3, that could be buffed. If we look at 3 weapons in Battlefield 3 in the assault class that are basically statistically identical, and that's the L85A2, the AK-74M, and the SCAR-L, their reload speeds are measured in milliseconds, not even full seconds. Their recoil, their spread, recoil patterns, reload speeds, rate of fires, minimum and maximum damage are basically all the same. The only thing that stands apart from them is the way they look in the first-person view. Their weapon skins. So, my advice to DICE would, don't nerf other guns. Differentiate the guns more than what they are already, because there isn't enough differentiation between other guns, like the L85A2, the AK-74M, and the SCAR L. There's too many guns that perform only in one certain area, and I think you could maybe raise the rate of fire or change a reload time to a different value, or reduce a certain amount of, maybe change some of the drop-offs. I would like this, maybe some of the drop-offs could be changed between the L85A2, the AK-74M, and the SCAR L. But in my personal opinion, the M16A3 is fine the way it is. I've been in competitive games in Bad Company 2 where everybody was using where everybody was using the XM8, and yet nobody complains then. I never understood why why people are starting to complain now in Battlefield 3. I don't know if it's because maybe Battlefield 3 is certainly the most popular and certainly the most financially successful of all the Battlefield games within the Battlefield franchise. So it has a wider audience. That's certainly a possibility. But it really comes back to my argument of why now. When this sort of situation has happened in the past to no complaints, and yet now that there's complaining, I really don't understand that whole argument, or that whole side of the hate that comes with the M16A3. I feel those are pretty much all my arguments that I can really talk about in the M16A3 debate. I know I didn't talk about much about the AEK-971. One of the big things that sets the AEK-971 apart is its reload time. Same with the AN-94. They have nearly identical reloads and pretty much identical animations. So I think that really sets it apart in comparison to other guns. But I feel those are my arguments. Those are how I feel about the M16A3. I think it's perfectly fine the way it is. And I think it's still very much debatable that it needed the 2 nerfs that it got in the first place. But how do you guys feel? What do you guys think? Did you play Bad Company 2? Did you see what came with using the XM8 in comparison to other assault rifles in Bad Company 2? And the popularity of that gun compared to the disdain for the M16A3 in Battlefield 3. All your thoughts and opinions and feedback, greatly appreciated. But that's going to be it for this episode of Battlefield 3, My Thoughts. I really appreciate it, guys. I appreciate you watching the rest of the video. And as always, thanks.
Just spotted a hostile soldier, over.